It's time for Media Meltdowns. Well, she's back. Fired MSNBC host Joy Reid is speaking out about why the left-wing network dumped her earlier this year. Joy Reid told Katie Couric that it had nothing to do with her failing ratings and even worse content, but she raised concerns that it may have had something to do with her race and her anxiety around Donald Trump.
There is a lot of anxiety, both there and I think in every media. We're seeing it at CBS. We're seeing it at ABC, where allegedly the View hosts were told not to go so hard on Trump, where there's a push for people to, hey, do less Trump, do more entertainment, don't be hard on him.
Yeah, I read that.
Litigious. There's a fear of him. So I think there's, and obviously
But Joy, you were, let's be honest, you were no different than Nicole or Rachel Maddow.
Well, only in one way was I different. I'm a black woman doing the thing. You know what I mean? And so I'm not different, but I'm different because
I was just talking in terms of your criticizing of Trump.
100%.
Yeah.
And Joy Reid did not stop there. She was just getting started, claiming that Donald Trump can't handle criticism coming from her because she's a black woman.
I think that there's a difference for Trump in hearing the kinds of criticisms specifically out of a black woman. It bothers him in a way it doesn't bother him like anything else. He's got this sort of tick about race, and about, sort of criticism coming specifically from a black woman, because we've seen him lay out and dish out real, abuse against black women journalists. So I think and also I did a specific thing, which was I tried to constantly unpack the racial history of the country, which is very much against the sort of Project 2025 thing. And it's something I can do in a certain capacity because of my background.
After the election where she told Americans that Kamala Harris's campaign was flawless, her show, The Readout, shed nearly 50% of its total audience. And you look back at her work on MSNBC and you wonder why that is.
We've laid out the stakes in this crucial election, where one side stands for freedom while the other meets the textbook definition of fascism, namely a far-right dictatorial regime like Hitler's Germany or Franco's Spain or Mussolini's Italy, but also white-ruled South Africa before Mandela and the black majority took control, or Vladimir Putin's Russia, Viktor Orban's Hungary, or Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela today.
How weird that calling your political opponents Nazis repeatedly just didn't really work out for her. And it might have even helped Trump win the election because her commentary was so disgusting and came at a time where more and more people were waking up to the BS that the mainstream media were absolutely pushing. So good riddance to Joy Reid. Well done to MSNBC for getting rid of her earlier this year. But sadly, MSNBC's coverage is still pretty awful. Its hosts are still suffering from severe TDS, and its new lineup is failing. Its ratings have dropped 41% in prime time since Jen Psaki took over full-time hosting. And what about over at CNN? Is that where the audience is going? Apparently not. According to Nielsen Media Research data, CNN finished with its worst week of the year. Joining us now is Chief Economist at the Institute of Public Affairs, Adam Crichton. Adam, great to see you, and we have to talk about Karine Jean-Pierre in a moment. But first, someone who's somehow even worse, in my opinion, ex-MSNBC host Joy Reid. She's now speculating that she may have been fired because of her race and because of her anxiety around Donald Trump. Doesn't really surprise me hearing that type of commentary coming from her. But what's your reaction to this?
Well, look, I spent a few years watching cable news in the US, and Joy Reid was the most hysterical, far-left, race-baiting broadcaster that I'd ever seen. It's actually shocking by Australian standards, and her ratings were tanking. The notion that she was sacked for her race is just absurd. She constantly lost her slot. She was paid millions of dollars a year, so she clearly wasn't worth it, and she's furious. Her style of politics, her style of rhetoric clearly didn't work. She was ranting away for years, and then there was a huge swing to Trump from black Americans, from Hispanic Americans. So, I think the network was embarrassed and they got rid of her. That's the reason. Nothing to do with race.
Absolutely, well said. But it's interesting because getting rid of her on MSNBC, it actually hasn't even helped their ratings. They're tanking, so are CNN's at the moment. And I don't really see a way that they can get their audience back when so many Americans have just seen them for what they are. Many of them view their hosts as just Democrat mouthpieces. I mean, what does the future hold for MSNBC and CNN?
Yeah, well, look, certainly MSNBC was just the propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. You're quite right. I mean, people criticise Fox News for being right-wing, but they often have alternative voices on Fox News, and it's a ratings powerhouse. They constantly win their slots. Sometimes their ratings are higher than CNN and MSNBC put together. So it's, it's a crisis for those other two networks. But as I said, they're ranting and raving against Trump. They had massive TDS. And it didn't work. So I think there's a lot of embarrassment. And I think the audience is embarrassed too, because they were lapping all of this up, thinking that that Biden was going to win, that Harris was going to win. And, she was thrashed. So, I mean, I think they've switched off just out of embarrassment, partly. I think they're going to have to become more centrist, those networks, and try to compete with Fox, which, despite all the rhetoric against it, I think is pretty middle ground, pretty centrist.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. Adam, we have to speak about Karine Jean-Pierre. She's now released a tell-all book, Independent, a look inside a broken White House outside the party lines. This is what she said earlier in the year, claiming that she wasn't really part of Biden's cover-up and there was a disconnect between her and the party.
There was a disconnect for me. What was happening with leadership in the Democratic Party and how it was truly, as my former colleague, communications director Ben LeBolt said, it was a firing squad, and I had never seen anything like it before.
So what are we going to hear from this book? Do you suspect that she's going to, I suppose, get the knives out, maybe name a few people that she's fallen out with?
Well, look, I certainly won't be buying it, but she'll probably refer to herself as an historic figure, which she did once in a newspaper article in the US, which was somewhat hilarious. Look, she was the worst press secretary the US has ever had, really, for the president. No question. She was the ultimate diversity hire, I'm sorry to say. Jen Psaki was way, way better. I don't think that KJP, as she's called, will even get a TV show because she's just not very talented. Look, they're all saying this now. Jake Tapper, KJP, they're all saying, oh, we knew what was going on, but they never said anything at the time. I think they're just trying to save their future careers by making these sorts of statements.
And making money from it. Now they do a tell-all when it doesn't matter, when it's too late, and they're profiting from it. But what does it say about the Democrat Party when you have someone who was kind of the face of it, who is now encouraging people to essentially walk away and look at being independent?
Well, look, I don't know if people will. I mean, as you know, the US is so incredibly polarised, but the Democrat Party is facing an existential crisis. I mean, it used to thrive by pandering to minorities, but as I just said earlier, there was a swing to Trump from all those minorities. So this sort of coalition strategy that they've used for years, it's just not working anymore, and so they're fumbling around with what to believe in. So, KJP probably is frustrated with the party because it's probably going to be out of power, at least in the White House, for quite some time.
Now, we've been talking about, obviously, the Biden cover-up, and Donald Trump says that the biggest scandal is also the use of Biden's autopen and using the autopen for some of those pardons. Now, Trump has ordered Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate the use of Biden's autopen. The White House has put out a statement today saying that the nation is governed through presidential signatures. In recent months, it has become increasingly apparent that former President Biden's aides abused the power of presidential signatures through the use of an autopen to conceal Biden's cognitive decline and assert Article 2 authority. This conspiracy marks one of the most dangerous and concerning scandals in American history. And this is not going away anytime soon. But what can really happen here, Adam?
Well, look, I think that's broadly true. I mean, the presidential pardon power is an extremely serious matter. So you would think the president would actually physically sign these documents, but that clearly did not happen with the suite of pardons that happened at the end of Biden's presidency. I mean, of course, the famous one being Anthony Fauci, who was pardoned, for anything going back 10 years. And there were many other pardons too. And I mean, as you point out, it was exactly the same signature on all of these pardons, suggesting that Biden did not even know that he was pardoning these people. So I think there does have to be an inquiry to work out who on earth was actually governing the US, especially in those last years of the Biden presidency, when it was, it was clear for all to see, for the American public to see, that he was in marked decline. I mean, he could barely string a sentence together. And, people like KJP, who we just talked about, were saying at the time that everything was fine. So, it is a serious matter, and I think that Trump's right to order an investigation of that.
Caroline Levitt was asked about the autopen scandal yesterday. Here's the exchange.
It looks different. It looks authentic. In fact, if you look at the last name, it almost looks like the president was having a hard time spelling his last name there. Is this White House of the opinion that the only pardon that would count is one that the president signed himself?
It's very interesting. Very interesting props. If you want to bring them to my office later so I can take a closer look, I would like to do that. The president is making a good point when he discusses the usage of the autopen. Who was running the country for the past 4 years?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it's strange that Hunter Biden's pardon, the person who was never supposed to get a pardon at all, appears to be one of the only ones that actually has Biden's handwritten signature.
Yep. No, that's right. And look, I'm sure that was the president's decision himself, despite the fact, as you point out, the president said many times, the former president, I should say, said many times that he would not pardon his son, but he did. That was probably the only one that he was aware of. But yeah, look, it is, it's very sad, actually, because if you take a step back now, there have been so many pardons. This precedent has been set now, I think, that you'll see at the end of every presidency, there's going to be, 24 pardons of people, and that's not really what it was set up for.
Absolutely not. It's extraordinary use of power and, preemptive pardons. Biden, that is part of his legacy. I want to talk to you about DOGE. President Trump has officially sent the first $9 billion DOGE rescissions package to Congress. So this is to gut funding for USAID, PBS, NPR, US Institute for Peace and other foreign aid programs. But $9 billion. It's no wonder that Elon Musk is pretty disappointed at the moment. It's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things.
No, look, it's absolutely not. I mean, the US revenue every year is something like 7 trillion $5 trillion. Spending is 7 trillion, revenue is 5 trillion. There's an enormous deficit of roughly $2 trillion every single year. And so $9 billion in the US context is absolutely nothing. And so I sympathise with Elon Musk. He spent months of his time. He sacrificed a lot financially himself to help the US government make savings. And now there's this bill before Congress, which he said is pathetic, essentially, which just increases the debt further. And so there's this token other bill you've pointed out, $9 billion. That's a bit of a joke, really. So, I think we're seeing the beginnings of the fraying of the Trump-Musk relationship, I think, for sure.
Interesting to watch this space. I agree with you that it is disappointing when they were identifying so much waste and then we're down to $9 billion. But finally, Adam, I want to speak to you about what is happening here in Australia. And that is federal spending on climate and net zero policy has surged to $9 billion a year. So a decade ago, it was $600 million. Now it's $9 billion, and who knows what that will get to. But what value are we getting for this money? Well, look, just firstly, $9 billion in the Australian context is a lot of money.
Yes, it is. It basically would be, it would be the 20th largest program of the federal government. So I looked at federal spending on climate change and net zero, and I was just shocked that over 10 years, it's increased 15-fold and about 400% just in the last few years since Labor was elected. So this is serious money. And, you ask about value. Well, there isn't much because emissions are actually going up. They've barely fallen. Of course, power prices are going up, as you know. So we've got power prices going up and the government is asking taxpayers for $9 billion a year on, renewable this, renewable that. It's a disaster, really. It's a fiscal disaster. And so when the government says, for instance, we can't afford to spend more on defence, well, just remember that they're spending $9 billion a year on all sorts of boondoggles for so-called climate change. So, it's a huge waste. Adam Crichton, Chief Economist at the Institute of Public Affairs, thank you so much for your time. Thanks very much.